Hello, and it's nice to be back. I'm feeling quite a bit better than I have been, and this morning I thought I'd start with something gentle, really for me, and I had a lovely suggestion from Gary Buchan. I think that's how I pronounce your name, mate. I'm not sure. I'm sorry if it's wrong. And he suggested, why not put together a tips thing for you know tools and kit for modelling, like a Mim's top 10 as he called it. So I thought, why not? I'll give this a go. It'd be a nice little comeback video. Um, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it down into two parts though, because I think it'd be too long otherwise. So in this first part, I'm going to focus on what I consider to be, essential tools and essential consumables, things like glue and everything that you're going to need if you're getting into figure painting. Right, let's get started. So in terms of figures, as I say, they weren't the first thing that I started. I was building terrain, but we'll start with figures. And for me, there are lots of things. It's the same with terrain building. There are lots of things that people say, oh, you can get this, you should get that, you should get the other. But to be honest, you just need the basics really to get going. And then over time, if you find a need, for more advanced things, then you can move on to it. But you don't need to do it to start with. So obviously the first thing, pair of decent clippers. These are mine, but they have seen better days. I'm going to have to think about, because they should spring back, but mine have lost their bungee, if you like. But you really need these so you can get a nice, neat, when you're clipping the figures off, you don't leave any of it behind. So to me, for figures, first thing you need is a decent pair of these. I think I got mine where you've seen some of the shops that I've been in. I'm not advertising any of those shops. They're just the ones that were local to me. And when I decided I wanted to get into it, that's where I found my stuff. But obviously, there's millions of places out there that you can buy this kind of stuff from. The one thing I would say with something like this, get a decent pair. You don't want something that you just getting a pack of something for £1, because you're going to be using them a lot if you're going to be building soldiers. So you want something that that you can rely on and that is going to give a nice neat cut. So that'd be the first thing that I'd recommend. And then for me, the next thing is a little craft knife. Now, I've gone through various ones of these in the past, but you need something like this. You can spend as much or as you want on these. You can pay quite a lot for them. As you can see, mine, it was £3, which I don't think is too bad because it comes with a set of spare blades as well. And I got mine, as you saw, from the works. But there's lots of different styles out there, but you could do one of them because they're very handy, for trimming things. You can get a special tool for taking off all the flash that you get on some figures. But to be honest, I find this as much use as anything, and I just drag it down the figure. Something. And you can just take off that seam, if you like, where it was in a mould or whatever. And that served me pretty well. So, you pay your money, you take your choice. You can go with something simple like this, or you can go for a tool that's specifically designed for it. But if you're first getting into the hobby, that is probably about the first thing that you need to think about. and then if you want to expand into more special tools, you can. The next thing I bought was a set of cheap little files, and they've all got pull some of these out, different type. I mean, that one's like a triangular shape, and you've got a standard flat one. That one's square, so it's good for like getting inside cut out bits. That one's round, which is really useful. I find that ever so good for getting into the smaller bits and getting off some of the flash. Another flat one, and then one with a curved back. And to be honest, I can't remember the exact price, but I think we did see it in the shopping because I've come across them there. There weren't a lot, under £4, and I tell you what, I've used them more, I think, than pretty much, with the exception of my clippers, any other tool I've got. So it's not one of them, you know, that I'm recommending and it'll sit in your drawer and you'll, you know, use it once in a while. I pretty much use these every day when I'm in here, on figures and, you know, kits and terrain. You know, they're perfect for the job. So that would be my next tip for figures. And then of course the other thing that you need to think about for your figures is the actual glue itself. Now again, there are lots of glues out there, so I'm not saying, you know, only get this one. This is just the one I've always used. I've had no problem with it, and you know, when I'm putting the figures together and I'm trying to get the pose just so, this allows me just the right amount of time, you know, to move it round and get it in position without it instantly fixing. So this is the one that I prefer, and because it's got this, you know, precision needle, I can control where my glue's going and hopefully not get it all over the place. So that's your next thing if you're looking for building figures, is the glue. Now that's all well and good, but as you know, if you buy Warlord figures or any figures really, you know, there's lots of figure makers out there, and the Perrys and everybody, depends what you're into. But the metal ones, obviously that's not going to do because it's a plastic glue. I just use super glue. Now, I found this one to be fairly good for precision, but I use a variety of super glues, to be fair, and I don't think it pays to go with the, you know, really cheap ones, but there's still some that are relatively cheap to buy out there, super glues. And I use that for my metal figures. So again, you know, it's worth looking around. You'll find some reasonable glues in, you know, all the little pound shops or dollar stores that are fine for the job. But it's good to have those two at least in there. Now, obviously, the next stage that you jump into is you're going to need a primer when you've built your figure. Now, again, there are lots of primers out there. Let me have a look. I've got this Citadel primer. That's a green one. Then the other primers I tend to use are Army Painters. You can buy cheaper ones, you know, that's for cars primer, and use it. I just never have, because I suppose that's just when I first got into the hobby. I thought, no, I'm going to go with what I see people using. And these two are two that I've found the most reliable. They've not let me down. You know, they've not ran on the figures. They've not gone gloopy. And obviously the main thing is, you know, you're dusting them from, you know, about 8 inches away, and you're just doing even sweeps. I've got videos back in the list. If you go through it, you'll see me priming figures. And this is one method, and it's the method I went down. But obviously the other thing is airbrush. You know, you can use that and use paints that are designed for it that you can spray your primer with. I did have an airbrush set up, but because I was working in a very small room, it just took up too much room, and it was such a faff to get it out and clean it up and everything else that I aired away from it. But that's not to say that it's not a brilliant tool to have. Some people would never use anything else, and I can understand it, because you can get some brilliant effects with an airbrush. It's just, for me at the time, I hadn't got the room. I couldn't justify using it. So I just went down the quick route, because obviously I was just using it for priming a batch of soldiers at a time. So that's what I did. I went down the spray route. But, you know, do consider an airbrush. They certainly do just as good a job, if not better. But again, it's one of them. You know, you pay your money, you take your choice. Anyway, the next thing you're going to be moving on to is paints. Now, again, in terms of figure painting, the first thing I did is I saw an offer to buy a whole batch of, I can't remember what it was called, like a mega box of Army Painter paints. And at that time, I didn't really think it through. I just thought, oh, well, if each pot costs that, and I'm going to get, you know, like 50 odd bottles, it saves money. It's the best way to go. Of course, the thing that I didn't think about, you know, if I get some of these down, look, you start getting lots of colours like these. There's variants. I must have about 6 different types of blue, and green, and purple, and orc blood, alien purple, vampire red. Now, I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with these. They're great, and I have used them for different bits. But in terms of your figures, I mean, depending on what you're painting, of course, if you're going down the Napoleonic route, then you may well use some brighter colours. But if you've gone down the Second World War route, like I have, let's be honest, the majority of the colours you're using are greys, greens, beiges, browns. So think about it, you know, when you're getting your paints, you know, it's not really a bargain if you're getting 80 colours and you're only using regularly about, you know, 10 of them. So, you know, that's just something to bear in mind. And the other thing that I avoided was, you know, you can get the little sets where it will say, oh, this is the German set or the British set. Just for me, I didn't bother going down that route, because I wanted to pick the colours I wanted to use. And then the other thing was, I just found that I could get the individual ones by different makers and do it cheaper than buying the set sometimes. But so the majority of my first paints were Army Painter, but now I'm buying more and more the Vallejo colours, the Vallejo model colour ones, and I've even got paints by where are they? Citadel, some unbranded ones that are model paints, and the different washes. So it's worth shopping around. I mean, again, I probably limited myself a bit because I just went to my local workshop. So I kind of shopped around with whatever was on show there. But you do want a decent, at the end of the day, whichever brand you decide to go with, you do want one that's specifically for models, really, because that's where you're going to get your best result. And then, of course, so if we put that on our list of basics, the next thing you're going to need to think about is some good brushes. Now, I have found some slightly cheaper ones that, you know, are for model painting, and I've got a reasonable amount of use out of these. I use them a lot. I wouldn't say they're as good as some of the dedicated brushes, but sometimes they'll get you through a complete army, and at the end of the day, if it's starting to flag a bit, then you can find another use for it. But a brush that I have used a lot, and again, probably because I picked it up as being recommended a lot, is the Regiment brush by Army Painter. I'm not, you know, like I say, I'm not recommending that you get this one. I'm just saying this is the one that I use the most when I'm painting my figures. And this is a new one that I've just bought. But the last one I bought lasted me for, what, 3 years. And I'm not saying it lasted me 3 years painting figures, because it didn't. I probably painted figures with it for perhaps a year on and off, and, you know, not a massive amount of use. But then it went on to be useful to me for terrain painting, you know, where it was still good enough for that. And I could do the window frames and things like that with it. But again, you know, you've got Citadel brushes, you've got all kinds of brushes. I bought this set. It was one of these Kickstarters by Squidmore. And these are obviously Kolinsky brushes. To me at the time, they were so precious, I barely used them because, I don't know, I'm frightened to ruin them because they look so good. But I have kept them for very special jobs, you know, ones that I'm really wanting to look the best I can get it. But that's it. It's basically sable paintbrushes. But that isn't to say that I don't buy, you know, cheap brushes as well. Because let's be honest, there's a lot of, you know, especially on some of the kits, the tanks and things like that, you can get away with a relatively cheap brush. I'm not suggesting, you know, the pound a packet type brushes, but you can certainly pick up a reasonable price. Another thing that I've quickly found a use for was this, you know, specifically for models, masking tape. It doesn't give you any problem when you stick it over things, and when I did use an airbrush for different things, I found this useful for just masking off certain areas. And I've used it when I've built models and tanks and things in the past. Don't tend to use it as much as I used to because I've got a bit more control now with my brush. But it's certainly still an handy thing to have in your setup. So that's, so you've got your clippers, your knife, some files, plastic glue, super glue, your paint, your brushes, potentially some masking tape to help you. And then the final thing, and this is one where I've only really ventured away from what I use once, matte varnish, because that's the finish I like on my figures. and I use this Army Painter one. But again, I'm not saying that there aren't others out there, because there are. But it's one that I've used and it's never let me down. No doubt I could find a cheaper one. No doubt I could pay a lot more for one. But this is the one that I go to, purely because when I've gone to the trouble of painting them all up, I remember the first time I painted an army, I think it was my American Airborne. I didn't want to mess it up. And obviously I did read around at the time for different ones that people suggested, and I read some of the horror stories of, you know, it going white and ruining it and you got to start again. So I weighed it up and I went with this one, and it worked. And then I used it again and it worked again. And so, to be honest, although I'm not saying there aren't others, I just stuck with it because I knew it worked for me. So that for me is the essential figure tools that you need, you know, for building these soldiers. Yes, there are other tools out there. There's lots of other things, you know, when you start getting into, you know, kit bashing soldiers, you know, there's other things that you might find useful as well. The one other thing that I would put into this pile of things that you really should, you know, consider having, green stuff. Now this is fantastic for filling all those little gaps that you get in things. And also, you know, you can use it to sculpt things. I've used this together with some of the moulding. Whether you've ever seen this blue stuff that goes soft in hot water, and then basically the item that you want, you press into it, and then you can use something like this, or Milliput is another one, because that's cheaper. But this one I find is a bit chalkier. I tend to use it for bigger jobs, but on figures I tend more often than not to go with the green stuff. And most of, you know, when I'm using this to fill gaps, there is one other tool that there's two actually. If you're working with green stuff, is a set of these silicon ended tools that you can use to manipulate it and shape it, or squeeze it into the gaps. I even found an additional use for that actually. It's fantastic for moving the transfers around when you're putting on, you know, the insignia on their arms and things like that. I found it a lot easier. The transfer don't stick to my fingers and I can ease it along with one of these. But mainly it's for manipulating green stuff. So I'd recommend them, but it's not something you immediately need to get. You know, this is the key stuff. But if you're moving up to that next bit and you want to get a little bit better, then, you know, I would say they're pretty good. But as I say, Milliput is a viable alternative, but I just find it a little bit easier for the intricate stuff to work with the green stuff. But that's just me. The other thing I did get, I don't use them quite so often, is this set of tools. Again, I think I bought this at the works. And it's just for shaping and smoothing and, you know, pointing and inscribing. All these type fillers. It's also very good when you're working with plaster, you know, for putting textures into it. But if I'm honest, I don't use them quite as much as these main things that I've showed you. I would definitely say that these things are the essentials. And then if you get into it and you really like it, you can start moving into using stuff like this and getting yourself some extra tools. But you know, you don't need to start with them, is what I'm saying. You know, it's very tempting when you're watching all the videos out there. You see all these things that people are using, you think, oh yeah, I've got to have some of them. And then you find, you know, you're not using it very much. And if you ain't got much to work with money-wise, it's best to focus on the main things that you need, rather than buying things that you use occasionally. If you're just wanting to test the water, these that you're seeing in front of you are the essentials that I'd recommend. Right, let me just clear my desk of all this, and then we'll look at some of the other bits, you know, a little bit further down the line, on figures, and then we'll progress to terrain. Right, moving along a little bit with your figures. You've painted it, and basically now you want to base it up. Now, the next thing that you're going to need to be thinking about for them is some glue. Now, you can just start with a basic PVA, but when it comes to PVA, you want a really good one, and you want it to make sure that it dries clear. And I would avoid some of the, you know, like dollar store, pound shop, you know, cheap crafting glue for kids, because it's just not good enough, really. It doesn't do the job. And certainly when it comes to building terrain, you want a decent PVA. I'm not saying you've got to pay a lot for it. There's lots of different brands. I mean, this is one of the ones I've used. One, I think it's Black's. I've also used Gorilla glue. But a decent PVA will get you around most jobs. And the beauty of the PVA is, obviously you can use it, you know, neat in some occasions, but you can also water it down, put it into a, you know, spray bottle, and you can use it as a sealing spray, you know, so when you've glued all the bits in place, and then when you want to seal it, you spray it with this watered down PVA, and that'll soak through and grip everything. And that's, you know, what you do to finish the figure, you know, to make sure the bits are not going to come off in gameplay. I mean, these are basics really for people that I know that are into it, but I'm thinking here more, you know, the beginner who's looking to get into this. So a decent PVA is a good place to start, and you can use it for a multiple of uses. You know, you can use it as the firm glue that you put your scatter and things onto, and you can water it down then and use it as a sealant. The other alternative you can go down is you can get, like this one that I got from Geek Gaming, a basing glue. Now, I like this one because it's got a very tacky feel to it. So it's not PVA exactly. It's got an extra element that kind of bonds things. So I've found that really useful. But that isn't to say that I haven't used just PVA in the past, because I have. But I do like this one, so I've used that for basing. And then, as opposed to the watered down PVA, you can get a proprietary brand, Scenic Cement. This is from Woodland Scenics, which effectively does the same thing. I mean, I don't know that it's anything particularly different other than a watered down PVA, but it'll do the job. but obviously it's more expensive. One thing I did think was, I thought, oh, do I really need that? And I soon realised that it was a useful thing to have, and that is isopropanol. Now, I don't know whether, if you've started doing these figures and you've got your grass scattered on here, say, and you try to put a sealing glue over the top and it sits there like a blob on the top and it won't disperse. Well, if you get yourself some 100% isopropanol, get a little cheap squeezy bottle like this and just give it one quick blast, and then when you're eyedroppering your PVA onto it, you'll see it just disperses straight away. It then takes it into it, and it doesn't sit on top. So it just breaks that down. It breaks the surface tension down on the grass, and it lets it soak through and bond all the material together. And I've never had any trouble with stuff coming off figures when I've done that method. So isopropanol, you can pick it up on, various sites. Yeah, I think you can even get it on eBay. But it is a good thing to have. It does do a good job of dispersing the glue, particularly on big terrain pieces. Because if you try putting, watered down PVA on it, it'll often sit on the top without that surface tension being broken down. So, and then in terms of obviously the scatters, these are just some that I've recently ordered. They're not specific ones I'm telling you to get, but you've got your things like foam grasses, you've got the sawdust type mixes, and these from Geek Gaming, they even do like a base ready mix, which I believe, as well as having bits of grass and stone and whatever else in it, it's also got something like tile grout in there. So it does, once you've glued it in place, it makes a tight bond. And with this, well, you can see me doing it on a variety of videos. I'll just tip it into a pot, shake that around so you've got a good mix. Put the glue on the figure, dip the figure in, swish it around a little bit, pull it out, tap it off, and it's done. Instant. No trying to drop it round the edges on the thing, because that's time consuming. Tip it in a pot, dip it in, swish it round, tap it off, job done. So that's another alternative. So that pretty much covers the figures. That's the basics that you're going to need. And there are lots of brands of scatter and sawdust and the foam things out there. Jarvis is one of them. Obviously Woodland Scenics do it. A lot of the railway shops you'll find have got it in, the model railways. The sawdust based ones particularly. And then of course you've got tufts, which again you can make yourself, or you can buy them pre-made, and again you can buy them everywhere. You can get yourself a basic set from eBay with a variety of patterns, or you can just shop with what you've got in mind. If you know you're going to be basing your troops for war in the snow, then you want something that's going to sit well in that, like icy tufts. So that pretty much concludes the basics for what I'd say you need for figures. There are other things, of course there are, but they're the essentials, I'd say. Right, let's clear this away and we'll wrap this one up. Right, so that's the end of part one. And basically that's covered everything to do with figures. And in part two, we'll look at the terrain itself. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful. If you have, please consider giving me a thumbs up, or even subscribing. And hopefully, I'll see you again soon. Bye.